Hey friends, this is Mike T. Kerr, and you're listening to the Northern Report.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. Welcome to the Northern Report. I'm your host, Sean Burns, and I'm coming right at you from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Here on the Northern Report, I aim to shine a light on emerging and existing Canadian talent, as well as some of the legends we're still lucky to have with us. My guest on today's show is Mike T. Kerr. As a wild guitar player and ambitious songwriter of Canadian heritage and American citizenship, Mike has lived his life through many historical and contemporary musical styles. He plays passionately and openly while interpreting the great guitar players of the past. A Danny Gatton lick or a Django Reinhardt tune is never far from his fingertips. Since his 2018 debut, Guitar Rags Country Ballads, Mike has kept busy performing and recording, and in 2021, he's endeavored to release an album a month on his Bandcamp page. We dug deep into his story and the journey that has led him to becoming one of Canada's most in-demand guitar pickers. I hope you'll enjoy my chat with Mike T. Kerr.
Hello.
Mike T. Kerr.
Am I speaking with one Sean Burns?
Yeah, you are, whether you want to be or not.
Yeah.
How's it going, man?
Too late now.
Yeah, too late now. You're sunk. You're in.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm doing good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I think like you, I'm searching for ways to remain occupied and creative.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
It's I'm going to interrogate you about all that here today, bud. You're in Toronto again? You're back?
Yeah. So we were in Halifax kind of until December. I think we got out just before Christmas because we figured there was going to be a bunch of people trying to go home for the holidays because things were really, looking quite good in Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
So we decided we don't want to be in an international airport if we don't have to with all those people. So we came home kind of before Christmas, and we've been here since then. Yeah.
You've been all over the place. Your website says you're born in Michigan, raised in Ontario, Quebec, and Virginia.
Yeah.
So what's the story there?
I was just talking to someone else about this, that I think a lot of people, when they talk to someone, they're like, where are you from? And they just someone just says, oh, Des Moines. And then the conversations kind of moves on. And unfortunately, I feel like for me, this is the whole part of the story, is that I moved every 5 years as a kid and kind of moved through all these high schools and all these different teachers and all these different guitar teachers, and kind of moved quite often growing up. And so it's kind of a different story.
Was that hard?
It was parts of it were hard. I mean, moving from Montreal straight down to Northern Virginia to a private Catholic school in Arlington, Virginia, the richest county in the state. And everything from the police presence to everything was different. It was such a culture shock going from Montreal to Virginia.
I bet.
But then another part of it is I wouldn't be who I am and stuff without all of this, because I could either be bitter about the move,
mm-hmm.
and blame someone for it or whatever, or I could go in and be I'm here for a good time, not a long time. I don't know who, and actually meet people that way and be open to meeting new people and new experiences and stuff.
It must have been difficult swapping guitar teachers like that so often, but maybe that was beneficial in the end.
This was absolutely it. It was super beneficial to meet all the different people along the way.
Yeah.
My kind of first main guitar teacher was in on the West Island of Montreal in Bay d'Urfé, where I lived, and his name was Ken Watson, and he made guitars, but he wasn't a full-time musician. He did a lot of contract work and built people's decks and stuff. But so he was a woodworker and he built guitars, and he was a classical guitar player, and he taught me all the kind of, first few books of the kind of the Royal Conservatory stuff, and we did all this classical repertoire and all fingerstyle stuff, and we kind of laid that foundation. And he was like huge. And also, he's one of those guys that if I went over to his house for a guitar lesson, we'd be talking about something, and I'd say something like, "Hey, I'm hearing all these people talk about something called the blues. What is that?" And he'd be like, "Oh," and he'd like he'd just like reach over onto his desk, and like a Muddy Waters best hits like CD would materialize, and he'd be like, "Take this home, listen to this 100 times before I see you next."
That's great. That's like, yeah, that my dad was a picker, and he was very much the same way. Like, here's where you get started. Go listen to this.
Yeah. And my mom was actually my first teacher, because she sat me and my brothers down at the piano. I mean, she is a music teacher. She's taught all these different places that I mentioned living. She, is a elementary school music teacher in all those places over the years. And she kind of did this thing that really, I feel like, set me up specifically for success, which was, she said, if you do 4 or 5 years on piano, then you can switch instruments. And she didn't say like, "Oh, well, then you can stop and I'll stop bugging you about it." But she said specifically, you can switch instruments if you do these kind of first years on the piano.
Are you still pretty handy on the piano?
No, no, not so much. I actually just, during this time, because I've been building up a little bit of a, functional like home studio space, I have a little keyboard now, and I'm remembering.
It's in there somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what kind of music were your folks listening to in the house in those days?
Oh man, we had some great CDs and some great records. My parents are both from New Brunswick originally.
Okay.
And so the CanCon was very strong. And, we had all of the great kind of Canadian country stuff. I mean, our queen, Shania, of course.
Yeah.
But we had kind of some more traditional stuff. Like, so I don't really remember any of the names, but some of these, like, kind of Cape Breton fiddlers and stuff like that.
Yeah, the regional.
Yeah, and just sort of the kind of that kind of Irish material, those great fiddle tunes. I just remember a lot of that happening. And then, of course, on the kind of larger scale, stuff like Great Big Sea.
Okay.
And it was all just the kind of the one kind of remaining thing, and Joni, of course, but also, my dad loved Joe Cocker and stuff. And there was always this acoustic element to almost all of it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you digging though? Were you enjoying that music, or did you just not know any different at the time?
Yeah, I was super into all that, but when I was 8 years old, and this is just at the end of my time on the piano, and things are coming up where I'm going to have to find an instrument to switch to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 8 years old, and I watched Forrest Gump on TBS one night, and I found out who Elvis was.
Oh, right on.
From that, and seeing Forrest strum the tennis racket in the mirror,
mm-hmm.
I suddenly start begging. And apparently, like, I just talked to my mom the other day, and she said I was like begging for 2 years for them to get me a guitar.
From Elvis Presley and Forrest Gump. That's incredible.
Yeah, and another thing that was like a big influence on me at that time was the VHS box set we had of all the Roy Rogers movies.
Oh, cool.
And so the kind of the country thing and the singing cowboy and the acoustic guitar was a huge part of it, kind of right from the beginning. And I feel very much that those Roy Rogers movies and figuring out who Elvis was and then tracking all that stuff down was kind of the start of me really looking for my own music, you know what I mean? Because my parents were like, "Oh, that stuff's, kind of old. They're not going to be listening to rockabilly or whatever,
You're like 10 years old when you get your first guitar?
Yeah, exactly.
And you take to it right away.
Yeah, just launched into it. And I actually remember
the Christmas morning that I got it, I have this like vivid memory of my dad kind of jokingly picking it up and being like, "Oh, like yeah, this is cool." Like, and he strums a chord, and I've put together the memory that he actually put a chord down on his left hand, like he did like a G chord, and played a chord on the guitar. But he's always maintained that he's like not musical at all. And I found out that he did in fact take some guitar lessons when he was a kid back in the 60s. Him and his brother both had he got an electric guitar for Christmas one day, and his brother got a lap steel. And they had, out of the Sears catalog, like the old Silvertones.
Yeah.
And of course they're long gone, and he never stuck with it, but he retained at least one chord. So I remember him doing that. But
all those years, he remembers the G
yeah,
chord.
yeah, exactly. It's sometimes it's only one chord in the truth you need.
That's right.
So I launched into like kind of as soon as I got that guitar, because my mom is a music educator, she kind of wanted to set me up for success with the lessons kind of right away. So got me into lessons. And I think this is a big privilege of my life, is like being open to private instruction in that way, and being open to taking lessons like right from the get-go. Because I think for a lot of people, and now that I'm getting into teaching more, I think it is a struggle for a lot of people to learn that way.
Learn with a teacher.
There's like a million ways now, especially online, for people to kind of find their own path and stuff like that. And for me, it was just such a huge part of my life and a huge privilege that I had these I see them as these pillars, these real rock solid kind of mentors that passed me down the line.
I picture you then and even now as a person who spends hours a day playing guitar. Is that a fair and accurate assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually just talked to my mom the other day, and she listed all of the things that I wasn't doing during that time as a kid growing up, because I only wanted to play guitar. And it's like, I remember like, Ken Watson, that first guitar teacher I was telling you about, he would come over at like, maybe 3 p.m. on a Saturday or something, and he wouldn't leave until 6:30.
Wow, that's
Because
great.
we would just be talking, and he would just be unloading stuff on me, and we'd be working, and he didn't leave. He didn't want to leave until like he felt like I had absorbed everything that he was trying to discuss that day.
That's great, man.
And so it just became this thing. And then, but I remember also like when the French tutor came over, I would be just bawling my eyes out, claiming all kinds of weird diseases.
But you took to it right away? Like, I guess you had experience with music already for several years, but did the guitar kind of like click with you early on?
Oh yeah. I think the big thing about the keyboard, and I say this to every single one of my students that I teach now, is that the keyboard was so confusing to me because you had to learn 12 different major scales. But if you strip the notes away, all the major scales are the same, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's all it is. It's just a pattern. And so the fact that there are 12 different ways, you have to learn all these 12 different shapes on the keyboard because of the way it's laid out. When on the guitar, the major scale is the same shape no matter what key you're in. You just move to the right fret. But the shape of it is the same. The pattern of it is the same. So suddenly the kind of the matrix of the fretboard started to make a lot more sense to me because of all the repetition within it. Something about the keyboard being like left to right always made me feel like what was ever to the right was totally different than whatever was to the left. But on the guitar, it all connects and repeats, and every 5 frets you get the same note again.
So at what point did you realize like, oh no, like I'm cursed with the talent and I'm sunk. This is my lot in life, playing the guitar.
I got into playing guitar, and then my big brother switched to drums, and he got this drum set, and I got an electric guitar right around the same time. And so then suddenly we have a little basement going on here where it's like, well, we just need to find one other friend, and we got to make a friend here, and then we're rocking. And so we started a little trio, And are you ready for this? This is an exciting band name from the early days.
Yeah.
Our band was called Irregular Weather Patterns.
What kind of music is Irregular Weather Patterns playing?
Oh, we started the show with an AC/DC cover every time.
Holy shit, eh?
Yeah, and we did AC/DC, and we wrote songs and we had riffs and stuff, and I was playing in Ibanez Art Core, like a big red Chuck Berry kind of hollow body.
Oh, cool.
Through my 2x12 solid state Fender Frontman, just cranked.
Just tone.
I remember specifically that, the treble and middle are at 10 and the bass is at 0 on the amp.
So you've always I guess you've been writing songs since then, since you were in that band.
Yeah, and just kind of, always starting with the guitar, right? Like always just sort of starting with riffs and ideas and chords, and I love just chord progressions, and kind of every time that I think like something's going to come from a blank page, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It never does. You always have to start with some kind of material. And so I got into this habit of just listening to songs that like I love, and about halfway through listening to it, I'll start writing something down, and it will always steal like one piece of that song, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whether it's like a lick or a particularly interesting way that it goes from one chord to the other, or just an idea or a tone or whatever it is about the song that is going to jump out, I just sort of hook that and steal it, and then that becomes a whole new song. So many times, like listening to some of my favorite songwriters and stuff, about halfway through the song, I just start jotting something down, and we go from there.
That's a cool approach.
Yeah, because like, where the hell else is it going to come from?
Yeah. Yeah, whether you know it or not, like it's it's coming from something you've heard before. So were you singing back then too, or you?
I wasn't singing in that band, in that high school band, but I started kind of singing relatively shortly after that, when I was kind of going through this whole electric guitar journey. We moved down to Virginia, and I meet up with a new teacher named Rick Whitehead, and he lived out in Gainesville, Virginia, and we would drive out there past the Bull Run battlefield actually to get out to his place. And he was a jazz guitarist, and I started that whole journey of really like exploring that music and learning the guitar through that lens. And that's what kind of brought me to end up going to Berklee College of Music in Boston.
So you had you heard much jazz or had any experience with that music prior to then?
So yeah, in grade 9, I switched schools in Montreal, and I started going to a high school that had a particularly developed arts program, and it was really sweet. In Montreal, in the Lester B. Pearson School Board, I feel like there was these schools that like some really focused on academics, and then there were others that really focused on sports and that kind of stuff, and then there were others that had like arts and like had really great auditoriums and great music programs. And so the one that I went to had this incredible teacher who was the head of the whole music department. His name was George Doxas. And if there's any Montrealers out there listening, like they know him because he's a total legend. And his son, Jimmy Doxas, was the last drummer for Oscar Peterson.
Oh, shit.
And I mean, he was absolutely amazing. And George Doxas had us up at like 8 a.m. at the school doing jazz band rehearsal before homeroom. So I, like my mom like got a call very often when I wasn't in homeroom, even though she had dropped me off, because I was still hanging out, with George, like just after, the rehearsal and stuff. And he was absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, I learned just a few years ago that he passed, and I don't remember exactly when it was, but he was such a legend. And to me and some of the other students who I know were serious about the music, he was like a total gift.
And then when does Berklee College of Music come into your mind, like as a thing that you want to do?
Well, so I'm studying with Rick, and like we're getting into the kind of the real meat and potatoes of the stuff. And in the school in Virginia, I was kind of sticking out amongst that music program too. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually I really butted heads with that music teacher at the school in Virginia because he was quite militaristic and actually from the military. So it just didn't seem to vibe with my whole thing. And I was getting into hardcore punk at that time, and I was just really trying to piss him off, and I did. And
Just being a kid.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
we kind of butted heads, but I think he really did see like this kid is serious about music, and sort of just started saying like, you can go to college for music. And I was like, well, thank God, because I'm not going to do anything else.
I'm sunk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started, and my mom being a music teacher and an educator kind of had her, ear to the wind, so to speak, and was kind of checking out different programs and stuff. And we applied to a few and sent some audition tapes, to some different schools. And I had this whole dream of going back to Canada and going to McGill, because we went and kind of toured their facilities for their music school at McGill. And it was like, it blew my mind. There was this thing that the new McGill school, this was like in 2010, so it was new then. But the thing that blew my mind was that like any of the classrooms in the actual music building, when you close the door, it's a completely soundproof like studio room.
Oh, sweet.
And I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like I think Berklee College of Music has this great reputation and this kind of larger than life kind of reputation. Some of the facilities were quite rinky dink at that time when I ended up there. But anyway, I just remember like not knowing anything about Berklee, and my mom said we should go up there and do an audition for them because I've heard of them. She said like I've heard of them, and they're kind of the new hotness, so we should check it out. And auditioned, and basically it all went very well. And then I just remember being like, my dad being like, well, probably won't end up there. It's pretty expensive,
Yeah.
And it was just like, okay, well, that was fun, but it was fun to go to Boston for a weekend, but I guess that's the last time I'll ever go there,
Yeah.
And it just turned out like this whole thing kind of just started to develop, where it just seemed like it was the only place where I could go to actually study as freely as I wanted to, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's all about knocking down those kind of genre lines and those different things, and just absorbing as many different styles of guitar as I could.
That's what drew you there.
Yeah, that's really what drew me there, was the fact that everyone there is the person that stuck out in their high school music program, and they're trying to do something and trying to say something kind of as loudly as possible. And it was like a lot of great conversations going on, and the thing that was quite scary and quite disgusting was the number of guitar players there, because when I went there was probably like 4,200 people total, and I think 15 or 1,700 of them were guitar players.
Holy shit. And they're coming from all over the world to go there.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
So that must have been pretty cool. Like, must have, run into some interesting people and some really great players.
Oh yeah, I mean, just tons of stuff. And like, those pillars, those mentors that I go through, it took me a few semesters at Berklee to kind of find the guitar teacher that I was really going to stick with. And you don't, have to stick with anyone there. There are like 70 guitar professors there at that time to accommodate all of the guitar players, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of jump through a few to sort of land on someone that you like. And I did the first couple with some real jazzy, like old timey kind of jazz guys, and it just wasn't totally clicking. And I was actually hanging out with these metalheads who were in the dorm room right next to me, and we were really partying like all the time and hanging out and listening to weird music and like producing stuff and like just making weird beats on our computers and stuff, and just like doing all kinds of crazy shit. And it was one of them, his name was Jared, awesome guy. He recommended me to his teacher, and I was thinking, well, I don't really want like a shredder teacher. He's like, no, that's not like what this guy does. His name's Norm Zoscher, and he plays with his fingers, but he's like just a total, out there musician. And I think you would just really connect with him.
And you guys clicked.
Yeah, just based on that kind of strange, very vague recommendation, I went ahead and signed up with him for the next semester and stuck with him for my whole rest of the 3 years at Berklee. I took every single private instruction, like every year, with Norm, and he's just a huge influence on me and a massive mentor to me. And his playing is like super weird and very technical, and he can shred, and he can do this, and he can be tasteful, and he plays with his fingers, and he's really into doing weird stuff. And he like arranged giant steps for the pedal steel. Like he's this kind of just, he's very open to all like bending those kinds of styles and genres. And I think he really connected with me because he's always been into like country music and roots music, and the roots of, and the way that country and jazz and swing like kind of, all sort of run parallel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I brought some of that stuff out in him, and we ended up talking quite a lot about that stuff, and it just became such an awesome experience. And his wife, Abigail Aronson, is also a professor at Berklee, and she led the Joni Mitchell Ensemble, which was really a collection of students who performed all Joni's material from across the years. And Abigail is like a Joni scholar. She's like she got me to play acoustic guitar in the ensemble for a semester, and she would hand me these transcriptions, and it would be all of Joni's tunings that she used. Abigail went in and transcribed the actual tunings that she used, and I learned all these parts, specifically like Joni's really strange guitar parts. And that was like,
yeah,
so Abigail and Norm together are like my crazy out there music parents.
That's cool. It sounds like you've always had like a really broad range of interests in different genres.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always been, and it's always just interesting to meet the people who like, to know about the people who lead you down one path. Like my big brother is a huge music listener and fan, and he's also a great drummer. And he, like, I have tons of, I would call it hand-me-down records, hand-me-down music from him that, like, once he kind of moved on to a different thing, I would be there scooping up the old CDs and mixtapes that he had. So, I remember the first, movement when he was just getting out of punk and the alternative scene and getting more into techno and stuff, electronica.
Yeah.
All of that great stuff. Like he laid this book on me called Our Band Could Be Your Life. And it was the stories of like Minor Threat, Black Flag, Mission of Burma, Dinosaur Jr.,
right, wow.
Mudhoney, like all of these just like phenomenal bands that once Nirvana came out were the reason why a band like Nirvana could succeed, and yet maybe didn't see that kind of same success.
Yeah.
And these stories just like rip me to shreds of like, Black Flag, like touring with a band like Black Flag, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
These kinds of like stories. And so then when I'm getting into the music and I'm like listening to Dinosaur Jr. and stuff and realizing that Jay Mascis is just like a guitar hero as much as Angus Young is, you know what I mean?
Totally.
He's like a total like guitar hero. And, all of these great tones and another big part of all those bands is that they were doing anything they could to get recorded. You know what I mean? They would beg, borrow, steal, and murder to put this crazy idea that they have on tape. And so from right as a kind of a teenager, the whole idea of like, it goes beyond DIY, right? It goes to, okay, I have someone who's interested, 600 miles, and I'm working on Friday until 8 p.m., but the show's on Saturday, and I'm still going to make that show because I have to,
Yeah, it's a different level of dedication.
Yeah, exactly. And just the fact that they were doing it with no money
Oh
and
yeah.
for no money, and like making it work and making these records that, compared to, when I was a kid listening to super polished produced stuff like Shania and Garth Brooks and Great Big Sea and stuff, then realizing that these bands were doing something so much more real and so much more of like themselves and their own voices, and they're doing it because they absolutely have to, and there's no safety net at all, was hugely inspiring.
So what happens after you get out of Berklee?
So then I'm living in Boston, and Boston was really amazing and fun. But I found myself sort of like, okay, if I'm going to stay in Boston, I have to afford to be able to stay in Boston. And I took a job for a very evil corporation, or not a corporation, but an evil website, let's say, that shall remain nameless for now. And I spent like 2 years working for them and just sort of not exploring my like, touring thing like as much as I wanted to be on the road and stuff like that, which I had been doing through college, like with different bands. And it kind of really felt like something that there were people that I had toured with that, like, it seemed to me like they weren't going to go for this again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, just like a one-off experience.
Yeah. And to me, it felt like this is what I absolutely have to be doing.
Yeah.
But it didn't end up like that. And I was kind of felt very stuck for quite a while in this job. And I discovered at this time through the means of like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Like, I'm kind of sitting at home. I have this job that I hate, and I don't particularly want to be around my roommates and stuff. And I want to go and practice guitar. And this is when Django entered my life for real. And I started learning all the Django Reinhardt solos and like spending time on those tunes and just building up my repertoire, like in that regard. And I had one friend in town that I knew that, I mean, there were many, many people playing Django's material in Boston, but I just happened to have a friend that I was hanging out with who was also into it. And so we started as a little guitar duo playing like cafes and stuff. And this kind of becomes the kind of thing that I've really held on to, is like the small acoustic music in like in like places that aren't clubs. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Restaurants and bars and cafes, and this kind of local scene that kind of comes out of people that play in those kinds of situations. As you know, I mean, you're the king of the road around here. You know all about this, and it's like it's not always a venue, it's not always a club. You know what I mean? It's like it's very often just whoever will open their damn door to you. And yeah, this is kind of where I kind of head with that. But then out of kind of desperation of like being like, man, I gotta get the hell out of Boston because this job, because this is kind of running me ragged. I make a connection, stayed in touch with, but was my friend Willie Stratton from Halifax.
Yeah, he's great, man.
Yeah, he's awesome. I mean, his especially De La Rosa, which I recorded a couple of parts for from Boston and sent them to him. That album I love that album, and he's awesome, and he's so sweet. And we kind of were connecting online, and he was like, well, like, what if I come down there, we tour, I'm booked to be at Americana Fest in Nashville, we'll tour over there, and then we'll come back up to Canada, and you'll just come live in Halifax after that. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. So
sold.
I spent the whole summer of 2016 planning this tour that led from Boston down through the south and over to Nashville, and then back up into Canada and across over to Halifax. And then I would like land in Halifax. And by this time, my parents had actually moved back from the US back into Canada and now live in Halifax.
Perfect.
So I had like, if everything went to shit, I kind of had a nice place to land.
Right.
And that's kind of where that's 2016 until the end of 2017 kind of encapsulates this time of just being entirely on the road, uh, with really no roots other than knowing that if I really had to, I could pull the plug and head back to my parents' place in Halifax.
So is that when you become sort of a go-to guy for the singer-songwriters when they need someone to back them up? Because in those years since, you've backed up a ton of very well-respected Canadian singer-songwriters.
Yeah, and this is exactly what happens is because Willie and I are going to Americana Fest. This is where I meet Corin.
Okay.
Because Corin Raymond is there for Americana Fest and he needs some accompaniment for his thing. And Willie and I backed him up on a whole set.
Right on.
And yeah, and then like as I'm on the road, I'm hearing more and more from Corin, like, hey, when are you in Ontario next? Or are you going to be here on this date? Or are you going to be at this festival or this conference? And then we go to FMO, Folk Music Ontario, and I meet everyone else that I now have worked with over the years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Really, like that first year at Folk Music Ontario when I went with Willie, that time introduced me to everyone who I ended up working with over the next 2 years. And so really interesting because, we talk about the conferences a lot and people have asked me like, what's your experience with the conference? And it's like, I am in a very privileged position to be like, I've gotten a lot of work out of the conference, but as a solo singer songwriter, it's a lot harder.
Did you have designs on being the singer and front person, or were you kind of comfortable in your role as a sought after guitar picker?
I was really down for that. And it was actually Willie again, when we finally kind of landed in Halifax, Willie was like, I don't really want to have my name kind of everywhere all the time like it was at that time. And he was like, why don't you, like, we'll do it under your name. Like, why don't you front a band and I'll play whatever instrument you want me to, and we'll put something together with like, under whatever name you want. And that was huge. I feel like that was such a huge moment for me because it kind of really turned things the other way, and I started writing with like intention and putting a band together. So I had a little string band, the Franklin Brewery Boys, and it was like fiddle and mandolin and banjo, and it was very like 5-piece bluegrass setup. But our music was much more like, we did a lot of fiddle tunes, but we also did like a lot of blues stuff, and I had like the country blues kind of like Deep River blues and stuff and that kind of material. And I was writing things much more along the lines of that. And I did this thing for a while. We had a Wednesday residency at Gus's Pub.
I love that place.
You know this place.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I did was every week wrote a song and brought it on charts to the band, and we played it for the first time live.
They had never heard it, no demo, just here's your charts, let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
And that was a really, really exciting thing because it just, because if you're not writing, you're not going to know what to write. And if you're not writing, you're not going to have a voice, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so to kind of hammer out a voice for myself, I had to write a whole bunch. And so doing these tunes, and like, it also helped me kind of trim the songs in a certain way that would be like, how can I like write a song that's like immediately snappy and immediately the band can just like get into the feel of and not have to really have their nose in the page.
You must have had a lot of experience backing people up and hearing, different approaches to writing, and it all kind of plays into you when you sit down and do the work. You kind of know what's working from a different perspective when you're a side guy.
Well, right. I mean, and look at the songwriters that I've gotten to work with. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is Corin Raymond and Campbell Woods and William Prince and everybody is like, these are incredibly you can say that they're gifted or whatever, but they're also people that work on songs.
And they're all different too.
Yeah. Very different. And they all have different ways of working on their songs, but that's the common tone for me, is that they actually work on their songs. And I would say no longer am I staring at a blank page and like, if it doesn't happen that day, I'm not, like, I used to not be able to go back to a song and work on it. Like, if I didn't write it in a half hour, it wasn't happening that day.
Yeah, I think it comes with getting a little more mature and a little more experience. Like, sometimes it's going to take months,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hey there again, folks. As we approach the halfway point of today's episode, I'd like to thank you once again for tuning in. You're listening to the Northern Report podcast. I'm your host, Sean Burns, and our guest today is Mike T. Kerr. I'll remind you to follow along with the Northern Report podcast and playlist on Spotify. Subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts. Listen on YouTube, our anchor.fm page, or wherever you find your podcasts. Mike had a brief but boisterous stint based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, where in 2018 he was nominated by Music Nova Scotia as Musician of the Year. We crossed paths for the first time right around then at the Trout Forest Music Festival up in Ear Falls, Ontario. Shout out to Trout and all the wonderful people involved at that great festival. We'll revisit that meeting and the year that saw Mike make the move to the big city next. I think I met you in 2018 maybe at the Trout Forest, and you were with Campbell Woods, and you were just about to move to Toronto. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And then you landed in Toronto, and you knew Corin Raymond, and you knew some other folks. So was it like you kind of got on your feet and established some gigs and stuff for yourself and as a side player pretty quickly, eh?
Yeah, and then, like Toronto was that thing that, because I thought it was Nashville for a long time. I thought that was the scene that I needed to be in and gigging every night in, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as amazing as it is, and I have a ton of friends who are working down there, and they have all figured out a way to play the game as well as doing their own thing, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
What was so interesting about Toronto to me immediately was that, just like Nashville, they're both tip jar scenes, people go in, there's no cover at the door, but once you're in, I always say, it's free to get in, but you got to pay to get out. And it's like a bar with a great band on, and they're doing their thing, and the tip jar gets passed. But the big difference to me seemed to be that in Toronto, these bands are playing what they want to play. They're playing their music. They've completely designed the show and the set list, and they do their thing, however specific or whatever it is that they do it. And everyone just sort of, with a venue like the Cameron House, if they know you, they'll put you on. If they know you and like you, like, they'll put you on stage, and you can pretty much do whatever the hell you want up there.
Yeah.
While in Nashville, the scene was very much more, these bands are jukeboxes.
Yeah, you're playing the hits on the radio, or you're playing classic country music, or I guess a place like Nashville's got a really good scene for everything.
Yeah, and the bars that I was kind of seeing with these tip jars and people playing is like, someone walks up, like I was playing a show in Nashville, and I was on my last song, and a guy came up and waved a $5 bill at me and said, you got any John Prine? And I sort of, like, in a guitar break said, like, sorry, man, like, this is my last song. And he put the $5 back in his pocket and walked away.
Yeah, I'm paying you for the song, man.
Yeah. So I realized right then that, like, oh, that's the difference, is like, it seems to me that the scene that I would probably end up being like, oh, hey, I can't make the gig, let's get Mike on guitar for this gig or whatever, in Nashville would be very much like jukebox gigs. While in Toronto, it just seemed to me like the musicians were doing whatever they wanted and the stuff that they wanted to be playing, which was really cool and really inspiring. And I happen to know three really kind of important people to me and to the people I wanted to get into when I came to Toronto. Was I knew Corin, and I knew my amazing partner Emma Jane, who who has a Cameron House tattoo and is like a total staple of the scene and knows everyone in town. And I knew Jay Swinnerton, which I don't know if you know Jay, but I think you might.
Jay works behind the bar there at the Cameron House, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And he was this kind of other part of getting into playing at the Cameron and playing the different bars around town. And he was hitting me up ever since he met me, because Willie and I played at the Cameron House some other time, maybe in like 2016. And he had been hitting me up like forever since then, just being like, hey, when you get to town, like, we'll start a band, and I just always at first was like, yeah, cool, man, sure. And then when it started to develop that I probably should come to Toronto, hitting him up and being like, dude, I'm thinking of coming down there. And he was like, oh, well, I'll set you up. And my very first night or whatever in Toronto, I was sitting in with Jay's band, and I met Nickel Robertson, and I met Friendly Rich, and I met Bruce McKinnon, and all these other guys that,
Well, it's really a great room, and I draw a lot of parallels with the Times Changed High and Lonesome Club in the Cameron House, like musically, and the fact that almost everyone who works there is also a musician or married to a musician, and it's vibey, and people really, really love it. Like, it's really special and meaningful to a lot of people. Like you said, your partner has a Cameron House tattoo. There's, I think, 5 or 6 of us here in Winnipeg that have the Times Changed stamp, the little rubber chicken stamp tattooed on our arms, like on our wrists,
Yeah.
My wife and I, and Andrew Neville was the first one, and a few of the other girls that work at the bar. It's like, like it really means that much to people. So, you become a regular at the Cameron House as a side person again, and as Mike T. Kerr. And I remember seeing you perform there, your album release party.
Yeah, that's right. And 2018, a big part of the 2018 journey was like record the album in Halifax, because I'm still living there at the time. Record the album, release the album, play some shows, and land again with a tour that lands with me moving, is actually really great for someone who doesn't want to bring all the material possessions with them. If you're living on the road, it's very easy to suddenly move in somewhere.
It felt like the right place for you to be, right away.
Yeah, absolutely. And then outside of, from the Cameron House sprouts all these other gigs and all of these other great bars in town. And Toronto is this town where you can walk into like any of the bars. I mean, any of the cool bars, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can walk into any of the cool bars and see like a totally killer band. Start going to these residencies the Monday night at the local. Tuesday night you go to the Cloak and Dagger to see Graham Mansfield and Chris Quinn, and their band is called the Hip Pickers, and you go and see them on a Tuesday night at Cloak and Dagger. And also Tuesday night you might end up at Grossman's that night.
Yeah, there's the infrastructure, and you say a place like the local, like, again, it's these great bands or great touring bands or local bands, and they're hustling for tips hard.
Yeah. That's what it is. And it changes your show too.
Oh yeah.
How you perform when you have to assume that as soon as you walk up there, like, I always assume that they don't have any interest in hearing me in the next 15 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the first 15 minutes of the show is all about assuring them that they do want to hear me.
Yeah, you're not going to ruin their meal or their beer.
Yeah, that, like, all I did was add more fun to your evening, and you're going to have a great time, and you're going to pay me for it,
Well, I mean, I've run across, tons and tons of people over the last 15 years, but very few of them look like they're having as much fun as you do when you're on stage. So, it's true, man. It's true. It's like, you look like you're having a really good time, and being able to be present in the moment of like having the musical conversation. Like the first time I met you, we were tasked to like run this campfire thing.
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't know you, and then you're like super comfortable to be around and happy, and it was really great,
Yeah, and that's that whole thing too. Is if you get thrown into situations like that, and especially musical situations or semi-professional, situations, you don't. I don't want someone to come up to me with like bad energy, or they're complaining about the last gig they had, or they're talking about how their manager screwed them, and this and that. Is like, obviously those things happen, and we have to have those conversations for a safer and a more like professional environment for an industry and an art that is like totally cast aside by the rest of society.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But before we get into that conversation, we have to meet and we have to come to kind of an agreement musically. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I bring that energy with me that says, whatever you are about to do, I'm your shadow on this. I am right behind you, 100%.
And that's, why part of why you're in such demand to back folks up. Like, people fly into Toronto to do a showcase or do a show, and they just need someone to play guitar. You seem to be the guy.
Well, that's the dream. You know what I mean? That's that's what I want, and that's what I'm working on. And it just feels so good to have people. I mean, if they're going to talk about me, I'd rather not they talk shit, I want people to be talking about how great that show was that they had,
You're the rare nice guy who's actually really good. So, man, I guess, like a pandemic, fucks things up for so many people that had plans or had gigs or whatever. But you've kind of turned this around, and you've taken on this album a month task. And it's like really been incredible to track your progress on this whole thing. They've all so far, I know we're early in the year still, they've varied in sound and style. And I'm wondering if that was a conscious decision ahead of time. Like, I got to make every month different than the last.
It was a very big part of this is all through 2020, I was writing and recording and getting used to like, putting the home studio together and stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And I was just throwing everything away. I mean, I have a hard drive somewhere with all the old stuff on it, but I never open it. It's like, it's just stuff. It's just garbage that like got me working on it just to be able to work on it and open up the program and kind of get into this thing. And then it was like, well, okay, so I wrote like this 2-minute thing and I kind of produced it and put all the parts in and recorded the guitars, and it's not going anywhere anyway, so why finish this? was the big thing, was like, why even finish this? Because what the hell's going on? And all during this time, I'm also working on an album of instrumental guitar stuff that I really did want to release and had plans to release. And I did in September of 2020, I released Spring Garden Bandstand. And it felt like that album to me felt like the very inkling of my idea for the album a month project, which was, what do I want to do? I did my first album, which was all my songs, but I sprinkled in some of my guitar stuff that I like to do, my solo guitar stuff. So that became Guitar, Rags, and Country Ballads. But then for this next album, I specifically said to myself, like, I want to do solo guitar, fingerstyle instrumentals, not play with a pick on any of them, do the whole thing fingerstyle. So now I have like a theme set out, and I know I'm at least going to do like 10 tracks. And it's so much easier now to write and put together the album's worth of material if I have the theme already picked out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. You're focused on the theme.
Exactly. So then when I'm going into this thing in 2021, and I realized if I'm going to finish anything, I have to set the goal for myself to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I put it out publicly, then that holds me a little bit more accountable. And then if I incorporate the subscribers, then I'm really held accountable. And so this was all the plan to get myself to finish something, and to actually write with intention and have the thing. It's all a writing exercise, really.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day.
And then once you sort of announce to the world on social media that you're going to do this, I mean, you're forcing yourself to be accountable for the output.
Exactly. And also with like the subscribers too is not only do I owe it to them to get it done, but also I'm not just giving to them, they're giving back to me by saying, yes, we want you to do this. And it gives me so much more motivation to actually get this thing done and come up with good ideas and actually work on this and say, this isn't good enough yet or whatever.
Tell us about the subscription, your Bandcamp subscription thing, and how that works, and what you're giving people and what they're getting and what they're paying for it.
Yeah, so I was really interested by kind of the growth of Patreon over the last few years, right? And that was started by Jack Conte of the band Pamplemousse, who are like, back in 2007 when YouTube first appeared, Pamplemousse was like one of the first bands to really be making really creative like DIY videos from home in like a home studio setting and putting them and editing them really well and putting them up on YouTube. And they were like, in 2007, they were like, YouTube is the medium, you know what I mean, for us. And so that grew like crazy. And they're, every single one of their videos gets millions of views immediately. And he created Patreon. And it's this place where you go and the artist sort of writes and shares pictures and sort of videos. And it just seemed to me like, what's the actual product that you're getting from Patreon other than just involvement in an artist that you like in their life? And that's cool for so many artists. And it seems really sweet. But for me in this project, it didn't seem like, I didn't want to start a blog. I wanted to put an album out every month. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so when Bandcamp announced that they were doing they have built their subscription model. And basically what it is just, every month, what I've set up is that every month a subscriber on Bandcamp pays $15 and they get all of my like back catalog stuff that I've selected as like, okay, this is going to go to subscribers as well as stuff that I have released in the past on Bandcamp, but I've taken down recently. That all is going to the subscribers as well.
Okay, yeah.
So that's kind of fun. And some older stuff and also in June of 2020, June and July, I did 2 albums of just solo guitar, like singing songs. One was all original and one was all covers. And I did that to raise money for the Black Legal Action Center.
That was the Quest Room demos?
Yeah, the Quest Room demos. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So like those aren't online anymore, but the subscribers have them.
Okay, I was going to ask you that because I noticed that there's some stuff missing, from the month to month and the Quest Room, and so I was wondering if that was, subscribers only.
Yes, exactly. So there's kind of all this other material that's for the subscribers and for our little world there. And then Bandcamp has built this wonderful messaging kind of platform where I can message only my subscribers and they're there and they can comment and on the post, and I can share photos and videos with them there if I do want to, kind of like the Patreon thing.
That's cool. Bandcamp has really been incredible for artists the last year, and the Bandcamp Fridays have really inspired a lot of work.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah. And, between the Bandcamp Fridays all through 2020 and then getting into them announcing like them releasing this subscription thing was really a big inspiration for me doing the album a month thing altogether.
So is it just an effort to remain creative, basically, this album a month thing?
Basically, yeah, like writing and completing things when like ultimately, if I look around, I don't have any deadlines. I don't have any gigs coming. I don't have anything to rehearse for. You know what I mean? I don't have anything to write for except for myself. And so I might as well do that. And also, in a certain sense, like if I do 12 albums this year, how do you think my album in 2022 is going to sound? Probably pretty good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're only going to get better, right? Like, yeah, I know what you mean though, man. Like with so many of us require a deadline, like that, whatever it is, a gig or, something. It's like, I know that once I set a deadline like that, it's like, okay, I need to work at it. And it's really hard. We're supposed to do these gigs here coming up, and it's like day to day, we don't know if they're actually going to happen. So it's really hard to sit down and do the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So are you going to continue to take the albums down? Or are you going to leave the ones that are up right now for non-subscribers?
So what's been happening right now is we're in April. We just put up April's album, and so there, if you look, there's only 3 of the 4 that are available to the public. So one of them, which is a country and swing guitar tribute to the music of Koji Kondo in the early days of Nintendo. And because video games have always been a huge part of my life, and the music is hugely inspiring. So I figured I wanted to put some of that stuff on the guitar. That album is behind closed doors, so to speak. It's a really special kind of fun album that I gave just to the subscribers. And down the line, there will be more albums that will be released only to the subscribers. But for the most part, if I can get away with it in terms of licensing and everything, I'm hoping that they will spend at least some time public so that people can kind of get an ear on them and just buy kind of a one-off album if they want to.
At the time of our conversation here, the April's record, the most recent one, is Heart Pine Valley. In the blurb about the record, you state that your gut instinct is that the album is fake. Can you can you dig into what you mean by that?
Yeah, and it's that it's my first instinct is that imposter syndrome. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And what you were talking about, how like I'm the side player and like the person that a lot of people go to for guitar work and stuff like that. And it's not, Mike T. Kerr, the songwriter and guitarist. It's Mike T. Kerr, the guitarist and sometimes songwriter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the imposter syndrome that I fight.
Okay.
And so the first inkling with this album is like, this is the first time that I've really worked on songs, like I was talking about with all these great songwriters that I've worked with, who actually put time and work into their songcraft. This is the first time that I've allowed myself to do that.
Yeah, like sometimes you're struck by the inspiration and you got to be, willing to accept it, but then so much more of it is like doing the work and finding different ways to force the work out. And it sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah, and playing the game of it too, you know? Like I took a whole song that I wrote for one of the songs on the album. I wrote it. I think I wrote Heart Pine Floors first of all the songs on the album. I took that song and put it on this website that flips text backwards.
Uh-huh.
And so then I took that whole song backwards and phonetically sounded it out to be real words again from the backwards words, and wrote the other song on the album called What It Is You Do. So What It Is You Do is just from a bank of words taken from turning another one of those songs backwards.
That's a cool approach. Is that something you think you'll continue doing?
I think absolutely. Because like, especially if I'm going to put an album out a month, I mean, I got to start writing some more songs,
Yeah, well, you're like, it's as much as we talk about, spending the time and maybe it's going to take someone months to finish a song, like you're not allowing yourself that time. So has it been difficult to find the inspiration and to keep a work schedule when you're trying to release something every month?
Well, this is that of it, right? And I think for the third album that I did with Nickel Robertson, another just a totally incredible guitar player from here in Toronto. And he texted me right away when I kind of announced this whole thing. And he was like, all right, okay, yeah, you're a big shot. You can do an album every month, but can one of them be you and me? Can we work something out? And I figured we were going to do some kind of guitar thing. I didn't know what he wanted to do. And he just said, no, we should do, he was like, have you ever seen White Line Fever? I was like, I'm familiar. I don't know if I've seen it, but I've definitely seen the poster. And he said, well, let's do like a 70s trucker movie country soundtrack. And that was the idea. So like, there's that theme thing again. Like as soon as we picked a theme, it was so easy for us to just spit out the ideas. You know what I mean?
Has it been difficult to come up with these themes, and how far ahead are you thinking right now for the rest of the year?
Well, that's an issue that I'm facing right now, is which one to do next. Is because I have, at any one time, I would say I have about 4 or 5 ideas of themes that I could go for. And I'm constantly like working on all of them for a little while. it's like I faced this issue when another thing I've challenged myself to do this year is read 50 books this year.
Dude.
Yeah, and I'm on like, I think I've read like 16 so far.
That's impressive.
And I always face this issue after I finish a book is I start like 4 books right after and read like 3 or 4 chapters of each.
So you got a few on the go.
Yeah, and then like once one really sticks out of those first few chapters, that's then the one that I finish. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm having this kind of issue right now with these albums is like, because it's still the end of April. I just put out that album that I'm feeling really, I put a lot of work into Heart Pine Valley. I would say that it's the one that, even though it's the shortest of the albums, it's the one that took the most work to kind of get to where it is. And I'm so excited about it. And like, it's one that I definitely wanted to make public because I'm just so proud of it. And, but now I'm kind of in between, where do I go? And so I'm at night, I'm kind of poking away with stuff on the computer, got my guitar plugged in and I'm just sort of messing with some ideas, but I have about 4 or 5 different ideas kind of going until in May, when I finally will have to, buckle down on one.
It seems like the most personal of all of your music that I've heard.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. And I think just kind of deciding to work on songs and putting all of that stuff that I learned from all the songwriters I've worked with into practice, and then taking that to the workshop that Buck Meek led and kind of letting him, or letting myself at least, like say, yes, I can work on my songs. Like, these songs are worth it, Like, what's
a normal day like for you? Like, are you getting up in the morning and like, okay, I guess I got to get to work on these albums or these books?
Yeah. It's like, mostly a day involves get up, get some food together for me and my betrothed. And usually there's some acoustic guitar playing in the kitchen, just sort of at first. And then it's like, put the headphones on, plug the electric guitar in, get to work on something. Or it's, because usually I'm teaching about 2 or 3, anywhere between 1 and 3 lessons a day. And it's going really, really well. And I'm loving teaching online. I didn't know how I was going to react to it. You know what I mean? Doing the Zoom thing. But it's actually become a totally amazing experience. And it feels very, very intimate. Like, we're there, we're dealing with the problems that whoever comes to me with a guitar problem, we solve it and we work on new stuff. And honestly, I would say most of the people that I'm teaching lessons right now, almost all of them are already artists or already have an album out or something. You know what I mean? And they're using this time kind of in the same way that I am in my personal stuff, is like, they're using this time to work on something, and they're saying, now is kind of a perfect time for me to just expand some of these guitar ideas,
I think it's difficult for some people to admit that they've remained productive and creative through the pandemic. And I understand why. And I think that sort of makes this album a month thing even more inspiring.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And I know that like, if you ask Emma about like, if someone asked Emma and I what I've been doing, you would get 2 very different answers.
She'd be like, I never see him.
Yeah. Because, my answer would be that I'm so behind. I'm not doing anything.
Oh yeah.
I have a million things that I want to do, and I've got this and this. Like, I'm not here yet, or whatever.
I know what you mean, man.
And Emma's answer, of course, would be that, well, he's put out 4 albums already this year. He's teaching a lesson every day. He's doing like more now than he ever has.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're a little hard on yourself, and I can relate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like, in my experience, I've taken months to make albums, like sometimes a couple blocks of, 2-week sessions. With Lost Country, we made our first record together in 6 days, and the other 2 we did in 2 days. So I'm a little familiar with different approaches to working. And you stated on the blurb there that with some of your songwriter pals, you wax deeply poetic on subjects such as taking it slow, working multiple drafts, and not recording the first 10 songs you write. But here you are, rushing out an album a month of the year and doing very little editing. I'm wondering, like, when things go back to, whatever normal is and you continue to record, do you think you'll stick to this approach of like not babying the material and overthinking it and just kind of getting it out?
This is this is an interesting thing, and I think it's sensitive to us and kind of our group of friends and the people that we work with, because I feel that we all have the potential to be completely making our own albums, and this is no offense to the great producers and techs and mixers out there who, like, I love working with, and I've worked with on albums in the past, and I know that they're doing a really important art form of their own. But there is, outside of like the really great personal kind of studios that we know, there also is this other industry of like the recording studio industry, where they have the gear and we have the money. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we often don't have the money. And, we very often don't have the money, and we have to like sort of totally destroy like our own livelihood just to record the material that we're so passionate about.
Yeah, you got to spend the rent money to pay for the EP.
Exactly, man. And like that, it's unfortunately, like, more often than not, that engineer like doesn't really care who came in on that Tuesday. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, that said, there are some amazing producers and studios out there who care deeply. Of course, the Song Shop, and I think of where I recorded both of my first albums in Dartmouth at New Scotland Yard. These are studios that New Scotland Yard is my favorite studio I've ever been in, ever, anywhere in the world. And I love that studio, and I will like always return to it when I have the means. But there's like a serious freedom and a serious like DIY inspiration for me of doing it myself and being here and making these decisions, and using the network that we have of people that I have, of being like, hey, Kim Wheeler, who lives in Nashville, who mixed my first album and is an incredible mixer and just a wonderful producer. Sending her something kind of from one of these albums and being like, if you have, half an hour, could you just give me some really quick notes on this mix, and sending it to friends and being like, hey, if you're driving, like, could you just listen to this really quick and see how it sounds, and kind of spreading that love around. And also, using the subscribers to kind of show them something early on in the stages that I'm working on, and being like, is this a direction I should go down?
That's cool, man. So you're really, really involving the people that are, taking an interest and supporting you here.
Exactly. And that's what I want. And like, I think, and also like I've started posting about this stuff on social media that like, hey, recording at home, like my room sounds like shit. Like I don't have it treated. I don't know anything about acoustics. I took an acoustics class at Berklee because I needed a science credit. And when I showed up, the guy had just come back from the teacher had just come back from a skiing trip, and his whole leg was in a big full leg cast. And he said, I don't take attendance, and the midterm exam and the final exam are both open book, open laptop. So, good luck. Yeah. Do whatever you want. So I didn't learn a thing.
yeah. Just stay in your room playing guitar.
I got an A in the class, but I didn't learn a single thing about that. And so, there's all these things that I don't know. I'm no expert. And like that gatekeeping that I see amongst even home studio people saying like, oh, well, this is what I do. Like this, you should let me do this work for you and pay me for it because I know how to do it and you don't, and you never will. At this point in 2021 is just
totally false.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, because I think I heard it was you that said something like, it's incredible what you can do with one good microphone.
Exactly. Just one microphone and one little, 2 input interface.
Yeah.
Like nobody in a home situation like needs a giant analog console, because at the end of the day, most of our listeners don't know the difference anyways.
Yeah.
is a big part of it. And from my experience, the albums that I've worked on and done, in the studios versus the ones that I'm doing at home aren't getting like any worse a reception. And in fact, this whole album a month thing is actually getting a lot of reception compared to my first album. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's such a cool project. And, you're recording and you're mixing it, and you're, for the most part, the only musician on a lot of these tracks. But are you using the same folks to master and do the artwork?
So the artwork is all one guy, a great friend of mine named Andy Wright. And basically what happened there was, when it was actually one of the first thoughts that I had, because if you're going to do an album, you kind of want the whole package, even if it's just a digital album.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
You still want it to fit the theme. So as soon as I come up with the theme, that artwork sort of starts to come into play with it too. And I was basically, what I really wanted to do was to find someone who would do all 12 of them and kind of be a partner in this. And I could send them the album early and be like, this is what I'm working on. Like, it's not finished, but this is kind of the vibe I'm going for. And then they can come up with something, that goes with that. And so the fact that Andy was open to that was awesome. So he's mainly a photographer from Kitchener-Waterloo. I mean, that's where he lives. And I think it's because of his photography. Like he did the Spring Garden Bandstand album artwork, and that the front and back of the vinyl is all one photo of an old trunk that he found somewhere, and he bought it at like a flea market or whatever. And he actually placed these pieces of paper on top of the thing. And so that cover is like a real photo. And I think I'm really interested in that. So that's what he's done for the Trio album. He took a photo of an old 78. And the Heart Pine Valley artwork is from, it starts with a photo that he took. And so I really love his style, and it's just really interesting to see. And it's also like he's learning skills too. He's like learning this digital design stuff and getting into using different tools in Photoshop and stuff. But how I met him was actually on my first album, was when I realized that I was going to start performing under the name Mike T. Kerr, but the actual cross stitch that I had made by the wonderful Susan Kendall, she made a real cross stitch that makes up the cover of the guitar Rags and Country Ballads. It took her like 100 hours, and it was like 30,000 stitches went into it.
Oh.
But after she did it, it came out saying Mike Kerr rather than Mike T. Kerr. And so I was hooked up with Andy Wright to do the photoshopping to get the T into that cross stitch. And if you see it now, like you cannot, and I showed it to Susan too. And she said, if I wasn't the one that actually did this cross stitch, I would never have known
that
T wasn't there before. So he did such an amazing job with that.
Yeah.
That, I was definitely open to working with him again. And so now we've kind of partnered up on this project, and he's doing all 12 of the albums. And I just think that's amazing.
Yeah. It's a great idea, and continuity, man.
Yeah, I think it's really cool, and I think we all have a little bit extra free time on our hands to just work together and try new things,
And the mastering, same place.
So I mastered the first 3 myself.
Okay.
And just kind of doing it digitally, just to sort of get it up to kind of a normal sounding level. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I then was talking to my friend John McLagan from the great maritime band Tomato. They're from St. John.
Uh-huh.
And he, over the course of the pandemic, has started, I don't know, I think he had this idea just before, but then I think once the pandemic hit, he was like, well, it's time to break out the tools. And he turned their old shed into like a state-of-the-art, beautiful boutique analog mastering studio. And he's just like in the last month has announced and like, released the website, and it's called Parachute Mastering. And it's in St. John, and his studio is like totally analog and totally beautiful. And so he reached out, he responded to me and was like, man, let me master this new one for you, this next one for you. And I'm very excited that he got involved in this. And I think that, I think once I put out the album with Nickel, that we were collaborating on this, more people reached out to me after that and was like, I would love to collaborate on something with you too. So I think that's really awesome and totally inspiring.
Yeah, it's cool. Maybe people thought that you were just trying to do this all on your own.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, after, hopefully sooner than later, everyone gets vaccinated and, pandemic winds down and things return to some semblance of normalcy or whatever you want to call it. How do you see things for yourself at that point? Like, are you eager to hit the road with Mike T. Kerr or as a guitar player, or do you think that you'll kind of stay closer to Toronto and try to work locally?
This is interesting because I think early on in the pandemic, I was having some conversations with some people in Toronto that basically, if Toronto and the tip jar scene is ever going to change, now would be the time to make that change, because we kind of we were given a hard reset, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it would be now that would be the time for us to like put something together that really involves the venues and the bands working together to make sure that everyone goes home with a little bit of money. And I don't know, like at this point, it's been a long time. It's been at least a year since I was kind of having those conversations, because gigs just kept getting farther and farther away. And now I don't know like what we would be returning to if suddenly the Cameron House opened, or whatever venue, like not to just call them out, but like whatever venue opened in town, it would be so hard to not just to hold back that wave of bands that just want to jump back in, and we would just be back to the same old stuff, right? Which is kind of a short end of the stick for the musician.
Yeah.
And that's an important conversation to have, but I don't know. I again, like, don't know how to have it yet. So in that regard, it's like, as much as I would love to say like, yes, I'm so excited to jump back on gigging, there's that part of the conversation that I'm still not sure how to have yet. But outside of that, I'd be really interested in bringing back the house show, which is so scary to think about right now because things are still so unsafe, especially in Ontario. But like the house show is like that DIY experience that I was longing for in other genres all my life, that I found, especially here in Canada, that, the house shows are so strong here in Canada.
Yeah, there's a big amount, a lot of that going around.
Yeah, and my time playing all of those was just so amazing. And just before 2020, I started playing the house show, a lot of house shows like solo, which was a really, really exciting and scary experience. But looking at all of my great like mentors and the people that I was playing with, seeing them do it and kind of seeing them come out and really grow in that circuit, so to speak, I wanted a little taste of that, and I started doing that, and that really became a place where I could be, the Mike T. Kerr that I'm sort of envisioning. You know what I mean?
I really admire your talent and your drive, and this album a month thing is really, really cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing, what else comes out of it for the rest of the year.
Oh man, well, thank you so much for all the support. I just appreciate you so much, and your show and all the listeners, and it's just so awesome. And I feel like whenever I return to Winnipeg, it won't be hard. It won't be hard to feel comfortable all over again.
Thanks for your time, Mike. It's been real great to catch up with you, man.
All right, man. Great to hear from you.
We'll be in touch. Have a good one.
Alrighty, see ya.
Take care, man.
Bye.
Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Mike T. Kerr. Thanks again to Mike for taking the time to join us on the podcast. You can find some of Mike's releases wherever you're streaming music for a nominal monthly fee, although I encourage you to make your way to miketkerr.bandcamp.com so you can listen and support directly. Follow along with the Northern Report Spotify playlist to hear music from the folks that I've covered in the Honky-Tonk Times column, as well as here on the podcast. Remember to subscribe, like, follow, share, give us a rating for the Northern Report, and know that I appreciate it very much. Our logo was created by Boots Graham of Boots and the Hoots, Central Alberta's finest honky-tonkers. Music on the show today courtesy of Sean Burns and Lost Country, The Divorcees, and Skinny Dick. From local legends to regional stars to the cream of the Canadian crop, you'll find it all here on the Northern Report. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll chat later. Hey, pal, what do you got for us?
Well, as you know, it's the old adage that if you want to get hit by the train, you got to stand on the tracks.